phone screen, her hands trembling as the words burned into her retinas. The notification had popped up while she was arranging fresh peonies in the crystal vase James had bought her for their anniversary. A simple text message that wasn't meant for her eyes. Can't wait to feel you again tonight. Same hotel, room 1207. Delete this. James. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the marble kitchen counter of their Hamptons estate. The sound echoed through the cavernous space, sharp and final. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as her brain struggled to process what she had just read. Her husband of 4 years, James Hartwell, CEO of Data Vault Solutions and the man who had promised to love her forever, was having an affair. Her first instinct was denial. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone had hacked his phone. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. But deep down, in that place where truth lives before we dress it up in comfortable lies, Sarah knew. She had known for months if she was honest with herself. The late nights, the weekend business trips, the way he looked through her instead of at her when she spoke. Sarah pressed both hands against her rounded belly, where their baby grew at 24 weeks along. The morning sickness had finally subsided, but now a different kind of nausea rolled through her. She rushed to the guest bathroom and retched into the pristine porcelain toilet, her body rejecting not just food, but the entire reality of her situation. When the heaving stopped, she sat back on her heels, tears streaming down her face. The bathroom mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized anymore. Once she had been Sarah Mitchell, a marketing executive from Cleveland, Ohio, who could negotiate million-dollar deals and command rooms full of suits twice her age. Now she was just Mrs. James Hartwell, a pretty accessory in a world that valued her only for her ability to smile at charity galas and look good in photographs. The transformation had been gradual, so subtle she hadn't noticed until it was complete. James had swept into her life like a hurricane of champagne and private jets. He had made her feel like Cinderella, rescuing her from her middle-class existence and elevating her to fairy tale status. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, married. Within 2 years, she had quit her job at his gentle insistence. "Why work when you don't have to?" he had said, kissing her forehead with what she thought was tenderness, but now recognized as condescension. "I make enough for both of us. Focus on making our home beautiful. Focus on making me happy." And she had. She had poured herself into being the perfect wife, the perfect hostess, the perfect ornament for his perfect life. She had learned to appreciate wine she couldn't pronounce, to make conversation with people she had nothing in common with, to shrink herself into whatever shape he needed her to be. She had even learned to be grateful for the prenuptial agreement she had signed without fully understanding, trusting him when he said it was just a formality. Now sitting on the cold bathroom floor in a house that had never felt like home, Sarah realized how completely she had been played. James hadn't rescued her, he had purchased her. And now that she was pregnant with his child, damaged goods in his eyes, he was ready to trade her in for a newer model. Her phone buzzed from the kitchen counter. Another message, this one intended for her. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. James." The casual cruelty of it made her laugh, a bitter sound that scraped her throat raw. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. He was probably with her right now, this mystery woman who was everything Sarah apparently wasn't. Younger, probably. Childless, definitely. Someone who could still be molded into whatever fantasy he needed. Sarah pulled herself up from the bathroom floor and walked back to the kitchen. The peonies she had been arranging looked ridiculous now, their pink petals too bright, too hopeful for the darkness that had just engulfed her world. She stared at the flowers James had bought her, probably while thinking about someone else, and felt something crack inside her chest. She picked up her phone and scrolled through James's recent messages to her. They were all business. Reminders about upcoming social events, instructions about household matters, requests for her to handle various arrangements. When was the last time he had told her he loved her? When was the last time he had asked how she was feeling? When was the last time he had touched her with genuine desire instead of perfunctory obligation? The answer to all of those questions was the same. She couldn't remember. Sarah sank into one of the designer bar stools that cost more than most people made in a month and tried to think clearly. She needed to confront him, obviously. She needed to demand answers. She needed to fight for her marriage. But even as these thoughts formed, another voice in her head whispered the terrible truth she wasn't ready to face. There was nothing left to fight for. James had already made his choice. He had probably made it months ago. The house around her felt like a mausoleum, all cold marble and expensive emptiness. Every room was designed to impress rather than comfort, every surface gleaming with sterile perfection. It was a show house for a show marriage, and Sarah was just another piece of decorative furniture. She thought about calling someone, but who? Her parents in Ohio would be devastated and couldn't help from 800 miles away. She had lost touch with her college friends when she moved to New York, and the wives in James's social circle weren't really friends at all. They were competitors in an elaborate game of who could look the most perfect while saying the least meaningful things. As if summoned by her desperation, her phone rang. James's name appeared on the screen, along with the photo she had taken of him last summer in Martha's Vineyard. He was smiling in the picture, genuinely happy, and for a moment her heart lurched with hope. Maybe he was calling to explain. Maybe there was a reason. "Hello," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Sarah, I need you to pick up my dry cleaning tomorrow," James said without preamble. "The blue suits for the Henderson dinner party. And make sure you confirm the catering for Thursday's investor meeting at the house." "James," she began, but he cut her off. "I'm in meetings all day tomorrow, so handle it yourself. I'll be home late again. This Patterson deal is eating up all my time." The lie came so easily to him. Sarah almost admired his skill at deception, the way he could compartmentalize his betrayal and speak to her as if nothing had changed. Almost. "How late?" she asked, testing him. "Very late. Don't wait up. I might just sleep in the office." Room 1207 at some hotel, more likely. Sarah closed her eyes and felt the last vestiges of her naive hope crumble away. "Sarah, are you there?" "I'm here," she whispered. "Good. Oh, and wear the red dress to the Henderson party, the one with the beading. It photographs well." He hung up without saying goodbye, leaving Sarah holding the phone to her ear long after the line went dead. The red dress. The one that made her look like a Christmas ornament, all sparkle and no substance. The one that reminded everyone that she was an object to be admired, not a person to be respected. Sarah set the phone down and looked around the kitchen that had never felt like hers. Tomorrow she would have to pretend everything was normal. She would pick up his dry cleaning and confirm his catering and smile at his colleagues' wives and play her part in the elaborate fiction of their marriage. But tonight, alone in this beautiful prison, she could finally admit the truth. Her perfect life had been a lie from the very beginning. And now that lie was about to destroy her. 3 weeks passed before Sarah found the courage to investigate further. 3 weeks of pretending everything was normal while her husband continued his affair with increasing boldness. 3 weeks of smiling at social events while dying inside. 3 weeks of watching James treat her like an employee rather than a wife. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when James announced he would be traveling to San Francisco for a week-long business trip. Sarah knew it was another lie. Data Vault's San Francisco office had closed 6 months ago, something James had mentioned casually over dinner, and apparently forgotten he had told her. "I'll miss you," she said, testing the waters. James didn't even look up from his phone. Oh, right. Miss you too." But he was smiling at his screen, and Sarah caught a glimpse of a message thread before he tilted the phone away. Heart emojis and promises she recognized but had never received. After James left for the airport, Sarah did something she had never done before. She went through his things. His home office was usually locked, but he had been careless in his rush to leave. The desk drawers revealed nothing unusual, just business documents and tax forms. But the computer was a different story. James had always been paranoid about digital security, but apparently not paranoid enough. His laptop was still logged in, probably because he had been distracted by whoever had been texting him. Sarah's hands shook as she navigated through his files, email accounts, and browsing history. What she found was worse than just an affair. It was evidence of a systematic campaign to isolate and control her that had been years in the making. The first folder she discovered was labeled Sarah Documentation and contained hundreds of photos, videos, and audio recordings. James had been monitoring her for at least 2 years, documenting everything from her grocery shopping habits to her phone calls with her parents. There were screenshots of her social media posts, detailed logs of who she spoke to and when, even records of her medical appointments. But the most chilling discovery was a subfolder titled Instability Evidence. James had been carefully curating moments where Sarah appeared emotional, upset, or vulnerable. A video of her crying after a miscarriage scare 6 months ago. Audio of her frustration when she couldn't figure out the new security system. Photos of her looking disheveled on days when morning sickness had been particularly bad. Each file had detailed notes attached, clinical observations written in James's precise handwriting. Subject displays emotional volatility under stress. Irrational attachment to trivial objects. Increasing social isolation and dependency behaviors. Subject. He was calling her a subject, as if she were a lab rat in some twisted experiment. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled through more files. There were email threads with lawyers discussing divorce strategy, documents outlining how to challenge her mental fitness as a mother, even correspondence with private investigators who had been background checking her family and friends without her knowledge. One email exchange with his lawyer, Thomas Brennan, made her blood run cold. The recording should be sufficient to establish a pattern of instability. Combined with her voluntary unemployment and social isolation, we can make a compelling case that she's unfit to have primary custody. The key is to document her increasing dependency and emotional fragility. Keep pushing the boundaries. Make her doubt herself. When she finally breaks, we'll have everything we need. Sarah's vision blurred with tears of rage and terror. This wasn't just an affair. This was psychological warfare. James had spent 2 years systematically destroying her sense of self, isolating her from support systems, and documenting her resulting distress to use against her in court. She thought back to all the times he had encouraged her to quit her job, to lose touch with old friends, to depend on him completely. "You don't need them," he had said about her college girlfriends. "You have me now. Isn't that enough?" About her job, "Why stress yourself with work when you could be making our home beautiful?" About her family, "Your parents are small-town people, Sarah. They wouldn't understand our world." Every suggestion had been wrapped in love and concern, but now she saw it for what it really was, a deliberate campaign to make her helpless. The final folder was the most devastating. It contained detailed financial records showing how James had been systematically moving assets beyond her reach. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, property transfers to business partners. The prenuptial agreement she had signed wasn't just protecting his existing wealth. It was part of a larger strategy to ensure she would be left with nothing. Sarah sat back in his expensive leather chair and tried to process the scope of his betrayal. This wasn't a man who had fallen out of love and made a mistake. This was a predator who had chosen her specifically because she was vulnerable, isolated her deliberately, and was now preparing to discard her in a way that would destroy her completely. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "How are you feeling today, sweetheart? Thinking of you and the baby." The casual cruelty of it made her physically ill. He was probably sitting in some hotel room with his mistress, documenting her response for his psychological profile. Every word she sent back would be analyzed, cataloged, and potentially used against her in court. Sarah deleted her initial response and typed back, "Feeling good, resting and taking care of myself and our little one." She had to be careful now. Every interaction was potentially being recorded. Every emotion could be twisted into evidence of instability. She was trapped in a game where she didn't know the rules, but James had been playing for years. That evening, Sarah called her parents in Ohio. She needed to hear familiar voices, needed to remember who she had been before James had begun reshaping her into his perfect victim. "Sarah, honey." Her mother's voice was bright with surprise. "This is unexpected. How are you feeling? How's the baby?" "I'm fine, Mom. Just wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause. "Is everything all right? You sound tired." Sarah wanted to tell her everything. She wanted to pour out the whole horrible truth and beg her parents to rescue her, but the words wouldn't come. How could she explain that her perfect life was a carefully constructed prison? How could she admit that she had been so thoroughly manipulated that she couldn't trust her own perceptions anymore? Just pregnancy hormones, she lied, making me emotional. Well, that's normal, sweetheart. When are you and James planning to visit? Dad's been asking. Sarah realized she couldn't remember the last time James had agreed to visit Ohio. There had always been some business crisis, some social obligation, some reason why they couldn't make the trip. Another layer of isolation she hadn't recognized. Soon, she promised. Maybe after the baby comes. After she hung up, Sarah sat in the vast emptiness of the house and tried to make a plan. She needed allies. She needed resources. She needed a way out that wouldn't result in losing her child to a man who saw both of them as obstacles to be eliminated. But first, she needed to understand exactly what she was up against. She went back to James's computer and began copying files to a hidden email account. If he wanted to play psychological games, she would learn the rules. If he wanted to document everything, she would create her own documentation. The war James had started 2 years ago was about to begin in earnest, but this time Sarah wouldn't be fighting blind. As she worked through the night, copying evidence and planning her next moves, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Anger. Not the helpless despair that had consumed her since discovering his affair, but clean, focused rage at the man who had stolen years of her life and was now trying to steal her future. James Hartwell had made one critical mistake in his elaborate campaign of psychological warfare. He had underestimated his target. Sarah Mitchell might have been naive and trusting, but she wasn't weak. And now that she knew what she was fighting for, she had every intention of winning. The perfect wife he had created was about to disappear forever. In her place would be someone much more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose. Sarah's newfound determination lasted exactly 6 days. 6 days of careful planning, of copying files, of researching divorce lawyers, of building what she thought was a case against James. 6 days of believing she could outmaneuver a man who had been planning her destruction for years. Then the hammer fell. It started with a phone call on Monday morning. Sarah was in the nursery she had been decorating, painting the walls a soft yellow since they had decided to keep the baby's gender a surprise. The room was one of the few spaces in the house that felt truly hers, filled with furniture she had chosen and colors that made her smile. Mrs. Hartwell. The voice was crisp, professional, female. This is Janet Morrison from First National Bank. I need to speak with you about your accounts. Shoo, Sarah set down her paintbrush, instantly alert. What about them? I'm afraid there's been some unusual activity. All of your accounts have been frozen pending an investigation into potential fraudulent transactions. The paintbrush clattered to the floor, leaving a streak of yellow across the pristine hardwood. That's impossible. I haven't made any unusual transactions. According to our records, there have been several large cash withdrawals and transfers over the past week. We're required to freeze the accounts until we can verify these transactions with the primary account holder. I am the primary account holder, Sarah said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't true. James had set up all their accounts. Her name was on them, but his was first. Always his name first. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hartwell, but Mr. Hartwell is listed as the primary account holder. We'll need his authorization to discuss this further with you. Sarah hung up the phone with shaking hands. She immediately tried to access their accounts online, but her login credentials had been changed. She called the credit card companies and discovered that all of their cards had been reported as potentially compromised and canceled. When she tried to use her debit card at the grocery store later that day, it was declined. In the span of a single morning, James had cut off her access to every penny of their shared finances. Sarah drove home in a daze, her mind racing through the implications. She had exactly $47 in cash and no way to get more. The house was in James's name, as were both cars. She had no credit cards, no bank accounts, nothing to call her own except the few personal belongings she had brought to the marriage. When she walked into the house, her phone was ringing, James's name on the screen, accompanied by that smiling photo that now looked sinister rather than loving. "What the hell did you do?" she demanded as soon as she answered. "Sarah." His voice was calm, controlled, with just a hint of disappointment. "I think we need to talk." You froze our accounts. You canceled our credit cards. You've cut off my access to everything. I protected our assets from suspicious activity. The bank called me this morning about unusual transactions, large cash withdrawals, transfers to unknown accounts. Very concerning behavior, especially from someone in your condition. Sarah's blood turned to ice. He was already spinning the narrative, already twisting her desperate attempts to gather resources into evidence of instability. What transactions? I haven't made any withdrawals. Of course you have, sweetheart. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Pregnancy hormones. You know how they affect judgment. Maybe you don't remember. The casual cruelty in his voice made her sick. He was gaslighting her, making her doubt her own memory, her own sanity. And he was doing it so smoothly that anyone listening might actually believe him. I know what I did and didn't do, James. Do you? Because the bank has security footage of you making these transactions. Multiple transactions over several days. Are you sure you're feeling all right? Sarah's legs gave out and she sank onto the nearest chair. Security footage. How was that possible unless James had somehow arranged for someone who looked like her to make those transactions? Or unless he had doctored the footage somehow? The man she was married to apparently had resources and connections she had never imagined. I want to see this footage, she said. Of course. I'll have my assistant send it over, along with the psychiatric evaluation appointment I've scheduled for you. What? Sarah, I'm concerned about your mental health. These memory lapses, the erratic behavior, the paranoid accusations about me having an affair. I think you need professional help. Huh. The word affair slipped out so casually, as if he hadn't been carefully avoiding the topic for weeks. He wanted her to react, wanted her to sound unstable and irrational. I'm not paranoid, she said carefully, and I don't need a psychiatric evaluation. Sweetheart, you've been acting very strangely lately, going through my things, asking odd questions, withdrawing money you don't remember withdrawing. I'm worried about you. I'm worried about our baby. There it was, the real threat. He was building a case that she was mentally unfit to be a mother. Every conversation was being crafted to support that narrative. I'm not withdrawing any money because I can't access any money, Sarah said. You've made sure of that. I've protected our family's assets from impulsive decisions made during what is clearly a difficult time for you. Once you get the help you need, we can reassess the situation. Help? As if she were sick, as if her growing awareness of his manipulation was a symptom rather than clarity. James, I know about room 1207. The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. The fake concern was gone, replaced by something much colder. I don't know what you think you know, Sarah, but I'd be very careful about making accusations you can't prove, especially given your current mental state. My mental state is fine. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, you look like a woman who's having a psychological breakdown, making wild accusations, withdrawing money erratically, going through her husband's private property. If I were a judge looking at custody arrangements, I'd be very concerned about leaving a child with someone exhibiting such behaviors. The threat was out in the open now. Behave or lose your baby. Submit or be destroyed. Sarah felt the walls of his trap closing around her, and for the first time understood how completely he had prepared for this moment. I need some time to think, she said. Take all the time you need. I'll be home tomorrow evening. We can discuss getting you some help then. He hung up, leaving Sarah alone in the house that suddenly felt like a prison. She tried to think rationally, to plan her next move, but panic was setting in. Without money, without transportation, without any proof of James's systematic abuse that couldn't be twisted against her, how could she fight back? That's when the cramps started. At first, Sarah thought it was just stress. Her stomach had been churning with anxiety all day, and the baby had been unusually quiet. But as the afternoon wore on, the cramping became more intense, more rhythmic. By evening, she was doubled over in pain, terrified that the stress of discovering James's betrayal was costing her the one thing she couldn't bear to lose. She called her obstetrician, Dr. Rodriguez, who told her to come in immediately. But when Sarah went to the garage, she discovered that both cars were gone. James must have had them picked up along with freezing the accounts. Mrs. Hartwell? Dr. Rodriguez's voice was concerned when Sarah called back. "Where are you?" "I can't get to your office. My husband took the cars and I don't have access to money for a taxi." There was a pause. "Mrs. Hartwell, are you in a safe situation at home?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications Sarah wasn't ready to face. "The cramping is getting worse," she said instead of answering. "I'm calling an ambulance. Don't move. Don't try to walk around. Just lie down and wait for the EMTs." The ambulance ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and medical questions Sarah couldn't focus on. All she could think about was the baby, the innocent life that was being threatened by her husband's psychological warfare. When they wheeled her into the emergency room, she was crying not just from physical pain, but from the crushing realization that James's cruelty might have already cost her everything that mattered. "Mrs. Hartwell?" A nurse with kind eyes leaned over her gurney. "The baby is fine, the heartbeat is strong, but you're severely dehydrated and your blood pressure is dangerously high. Have you been under unusual stress lately?" Sarah looked up at the fluorescent lights and thought about the question. Unusual stress, as if there were normal levels of stress that included discovering your husband was systematically destroying your life. "Yes," she whispered, "I've been under stress." As the nurses worked around her, hooking up IVs and monitors, Sarah realized that James had won the first battle. He had isolated her financially, made her appear unstable, and now had her hospitalized with pregnancy complications that could be blamed on her inability to cope with stress. When the attending physician asked for her emergency contact information, Sarah gave them James's number. She had no choice. He was the only person in New York who was supposed to care about her welfare. "Your husband is out of town," the nurse reported back. "He said he'll try to get back as soon as possible, but he's concerned that this hospitalization might be a sign of deeper psychological issues." Even from hundreds of miles away, James was controlling the narrative. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to think of anyone else she could call, anyone who might help her. But James had been thorough in his isolation campaign. There was no one. As she lay in the hospital bed, monitored and medicated and utterly alone, Sarah realized that the first phase of James's plan was complete. He had systematically destroyed her independence, isolated her from potential allies, and now had medical documentation of what appeared to be a stress-induced psychological breakdown. The perfect trap, sprung with surgical precision, and Sarah was caught right in the center of it, with nowhere to run and no one to turn to for help. The only question now was whether she would find the strength to fight back before James finished what he had started. The hospital became Sarah's sanctuary for 3 days. 3 days where she didn't have to pretend everything was fine, didn't have to perform the role of the perfect wife, didn't have to navigate James's psychological minefield. The medical staff was kind and professional, the room was simple and honest, and for the first time in months, Sarah felt like she could breathe. Dr. Rodriguez visited every morning, monitoring the baby's progress and Sarah's recovery. The cramping had stopped, her blood pressure was stabilizing, and the baby's heartbeat remained strong and steady. "You and the baby are going to be fine," Dr. Rodriguez assured her during Wednesday morning's visit. "But I'm concerned about the stress levels that brought you here. Is there anything going on at home that we should discuss?" Sarah wanted to tell her everything. Dr. Rodriguez seemed genuinely concerned, not just about her physical health, but about her overall well-being. But Sarah had learned to be careful with her words. James had already primed the medical staff to see her as potentially unstable. "My husband and I are going through some difficulties," she said carefully. Dr. Rodriguez nodded. "Marital stress during pregnancy is more common than you might think. Have you considered counseling? Both individual and couples therapy can be very helpful." "I'm not sure my husband would be open to that. Sometimes we have to take care of ourselves first before we can take care of our relationships. There are resources available, support groups, counseling services, advocacy organizations for women in difficult situations." The way she said it made Sarah wonder if Dr. Rodriguez suspected more than she was letting on. But before Sarah could explore the possibility, a nurse knocked on the door. "Mrs. Hartwell, there's a gentleman here to see you. Says he's an old friend of your husband's." Sarah's heart sank. One of James's associates, probably sent to check on her, and report back about her condition and state of mind. She braced herself for another performance, another careful conversation where every word might be analyzed and used against her. But the man who walked through the door wasn't what she expected. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-40s, with graying hair and intelligent brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His clothes were expensive, but not flashy, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, approaching her bed with careful deliberation. "My name is Marcus Reed. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I wanted to check on your well-being." The name was familiar, though Sarah couldn't place it immediately. "Do I know you?" "We've never been formally introduced, but I know your husband. We have a complicated history." He paused, glancing around the room as if checking for listening devices. "May I sit down? What I have to say might be difficult to hear." Sarah nodded, intrigued despite her exhaustion. Marcus pulled a chair close to her bed and sat down, his expression serious. "I used to be James's business partner," he began. "We founded Data Vault Solutions together 7 years ago. I handled the technical development while James focused on business operations and funding. For the first few years, everything was legitimate. We were building something revolutionary, something that could change how companies handle data security." Sarah listened, trying to process this information. James had never mentioned having a partner. According to him, he had built Data Vault from nothing, a self-made success story. "What happened?" she asked. Marcus's expression darkened. "I discovered that James was using our platform for more than just data security. He was collecting information illegally, selling user data to third parties, and using our access to corporate networks for what amounted to industrial espionage. When I confronted him about it, he offered me a choice: take a buyout and stay quiet, or be destroyed professionally and personally." "You took the buyout?" "I did. I was young and scared, and James made it clear that he had the resources and connections to ruin me if I didn't comply. He had already started building files on me, documenting my personal life, creating leverage he could use if necessary." "Sound familiar?" Sarah's blood ran cold. "How do you know about that?" "Because I've been watching James for 3 years, documenting his activities, building a case against him. I know what he did to you, Mrs. Hartwell. The isolation, the financial manipulation, the systematic psychological abuse. I know because he used the same playbook on me, and I've seen him use it on others." "Others?" Marcus nodded grimly. "You're not his first victim. There have been 2 other women over the past 5 years. Both relationships followed the same pattern: whirlwind romance, quick marriage, gradual isolation, then systematic destruction when he was ready to move on. Both women ended up hospitalized for stress-related complications. Both lost custody battles. Both are now living under assumed names in other states, too traumatized and financially destroyed to fight back." Sarah felt sick. She wasn't special. She wasn't even unique. She was just the latest in a series of victims, a pattern of predatory behavior that James had refined over years of practice. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I think you might be different. The other women had no resources, no support systems, no way to fight back effectively. But you have something they didn't have." "What's that?" Marcus leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You have me, and I have 3 years' worth of evidence that James is running a criminal enterprise. Financial fraud, data theft, blackmail, tax evasion, enough to put him in federal prison for 20 years. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. "You'd help me?" "I'd help destroy him," Marcus corrected. "He's been operating with impunity for too long, hurting too many people. But I need someone with inside access, someone who can help me gather the final pieces of evidence I need to build an airtight case." Sarah stared at him, trying to process the implications. "What kind of evidence?" "Financial records, client communications, documentation of his data collection activities, things that would be in his home office or on his personal devices, things you might be able to access. He's been watching me, recording me. He'll know if I do anything suspicious. Not if we're careful, not if we make it look like you're having the breakdown he wants you to have. Erratic behavior, emotional instability, random searching through his things. He'll document it as evidence of your mental deterioration, never suspecting that you're actually gathering evidence against him. The plan was risky, Sarah realized, but it was also brilliant. Use James's own surveillance and psychological manipulation against him. Let him think he was winning while she was actually fighting back. If we do this, she said slowly, and we get caught, then you'll be in the same position you're in now, except you'll have tried to fight back. Mrs. Hartwell, James is going to destroy you whether you resist or not. The only question is whether you go down fighting or you let him win without a battle. Sarah thought about the other women Marcus had mentioned, living under assumed names, too broken to fight for justice. She thought about her baby, growing inside her, innocent of its father's crimes, but destined to be used as a weapon in his psychological warfare. She thought about the woman she used to be before James had begun reshaping her into his perfect victim. Sarah Mitchell wouldn't have hesitated to take this chance. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Marcus smiled for the first time since entering her room, and Sarah saw a glimpse of the idealistic young entrepreneur he must have been before James had betrayed him. "First, you need to get out of this hospital and back to the house. Act grateful for James's concern, apologetic for your breakdown, eager to get help, and be the wife he wants you to be. Make him think his plan is working perfectly. And then we spring our own trap. James thinks he's playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. Time to show him what happens when someone else knows the rules of the game." As Marcus left the hospital room, Sarah felt more hope than she had experienced in months. She wasn't alone anymore. She had an ally, a plan, and most importantly, a chance to turn the tables on the man who had systematically destroyed her life. James Hartwell was about to discover that his perfect victim had found a very dangerous friend. Sarah's performance as the grateful, apologetic wife was Academy Award worthy. When James returned from his supposed business trip on Thursday evening, she met him at the door with tears in her eyes and trembling hands. "James, I'm so sorry," she said, allowing her voice to break just enough to sound genuine. "I don't know what's been wrong with me lately. The doctors said it might be pregnancy hormones affecting my judgment." James's expression was a masterpiece of manufactured concern. He gathered her into his arms, holding her close while she could feel him calculating her words, measuring her submission. "It's all right, sweetheart," he murmured into her hair. "I was worried sick when I got the call from the hospital, but you're home now and we're going to get you all the help you need." Help! The word had become a weapon in his arsenal, a way to pathologize her growing awareness of his manipulation. "I know I've been acting strangely," Sarah continued, following the script she and Marcus had developed. "Going through your things, asking weird questions. I can barely remember doing half of it. It's like I wasn't myself." "Pregnancy can do that," James said, stroking her hair with practiced gentleness. "The important thing is that you recognize it now. Recognition is the first step toward getting better." Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into the role of the confused, dependent wife, seeking her husband's guidance and forgiveness. She apologized repeatedly for her suspicious behavior, asked his advice about every decision, and made sure to appear fragile and overwhelmed whenever he was around. The performance was exhausting, but it worked. James's guard dropped incrementally as he began to believe that his psychological campaign had succeeded completely. He started leaving his office door unlocked again, began taking calls in front of her, even left his laptop open while he showered. Meanwhile, Marcus coached Sarah through encrypted messaging apps about what to look for and how to document it. They developed a system. Sarah would photograph documents and files during the day while James was at work, then delete the photos from her phone after uploading them to a secure cloud account that Marcus had set up. The evidence they uncovered was staggering. James wasn't just running a data security company, he was operating a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Data Vault's legitimate clients paid for data protection, but James was simultaneously selling their information to competitors and foreign entities. He had hacked into dozens of corporate networks, stealing trade secrets and selling them to the highest bidder. But the financial crimes were just the beginning. Sarah discovered folders full of blackmail material on business rivals, politicians, and former associates. Photos and documents obtained through illegal surveillance, personal information gathered through data breaches, communications intercepted through his own security platform. Marcus had been right. James was running a criminal empire, and everyone who came into contact with him was potentially a target for manipulation and exploitation. The most disturbing discovery was a folder labeled Wife Management that contained detailed psychological profiles of all his previous victims. James had studied techniques of emotional manipulation with the same systematic approach he brought to corporate espionage. He had files on gaslighting, isolation tactics, financial abuse, and legal strategies for discrediting victims. Sarah found transcripts of conversations with other men who had attended what appeared to be workshops on high-value asset protection during relationship dissolution. James wasn't just a predator, he was part of a network of wealthy men who shared techniques for psychologically destroying their wives and partners. "This is bigger than I thought," Marcus told her during one of their careful phone conversations. "We're not just talking about one criminal, we're looking at an entire network of financial and psychological abuse." Sarah felt sick reading through the files. Each woman's destruction had been planned and executed with clinical precision, but she also felt something else: rage. James hadn't just hurt her, he was part of a systematic campaign to victimize women, and he was teaching other men to do the same thing. "How long do we need to keep gathering evidence?" she asked. "A few more days. I want to get the financial records that show the offshore accounts and the client lists that prove the data sales. Once we have those, we'll have enough to bring in the FBI." The FBI. Sarah had never imagined her life would reach a point where federal agents would be involved, but James's crimes had apparently crossed multiple jurisdictions and involved national security implications. "What happens to me when this all comes out?" she asked. "He's still building a case that I'm mentally unstable. Even if we prove he's a criminal, that doesn't mean I'll get custody of my baby. It will when we show that his documentation of your instability was part of a deliberate campaign of psychological abuse. The recordings he made, the financial manipulation, the isolation tactics, all of it becomes evidence of his criminal behavior rather than proof of your mental health issues." It was a good plan, Sarah realized. Turn James's own evidence against him. Show that her supposed breakdown was actually a reasonable response to systematic psychological torture. But plans, she was learning, rarely survived contact with reality. On Monday morning, while James was in his office taking what he thought was a private conference call, Sarah was photographing financial documents from his desk drawer. She had become comfortable with the routine, confident in her ability to gather evidence without detection. She didn't notice that James's call had ended early. She didn't hear his footsteps in the hallway. She didn't realize he was standing in the doorway until she heard his voice, cold and deadly quiet. "Find something interesting, Sarah?" Sarah's blood turned to ice. She was holding a folder full of bank statements from Cayman Islands accounts, her phone in her other hand with the camera app still open. There was no innocent explanation for what she was doing. James stepped into the room and closed the door behind him with deliberate calm. His face was a mask of controlled fury, and Sarah realized that she was seeing the real James Hartwell for the first time. Not the charming businessman or the concerned husband, but the predator who had been hiding behind those facades. "I have to admit, I'm impressed," he said, walking toward his desk with measured steps. "The helpless wife act was very convincing. For a while there, I actually thought my psychological intervention had worked." Sarah's hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. "James, I can explain." "Oh, I think the situation is quite clear. You've been photographing my private documents and sending them to someone. The question is who?" His eyes narrowed as he studied her terrified face. "Marcus Reed, perhaps? I wondered when he might surface." The fact that James knew about Marcus made Sarah's knees go weak. How long had he known? How much of their plan had been compromised from the beginning? "I should have seen this coming," James continued, settling into his desk chair as if they were having a normal conversation. "Marcus always was too idealistic for his own good, and you were always too smart to stay broken for long. You can't get away with what you've been doing," Sarah said, trying to summon some courage. "People will find out." James laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth or humor. "People will find out what I want them to find out. For instance, they're going to find out that my mentally unstable wife has been working with my disturbed former business partner to frame me for crimes I didn't commit. No one will believe that, won't they? You've been hospitalized for psychological breakdown. You've been caught going through my private property. Marcus has a history of making false accusations against me and was forced to leave our company under suspicious circumstances. Together, you make a very compelling case for conspiracy and extortion." Sarah realized that James had been playing a game several moves ahead of everyone else. He had allowed her to gather evidence, knowing it would implicate her in what he could spin as an extortion scheme. He had probably been feeding Marcus false information for months, building a trap within a trap. "In fact," James continued, reaching for his phone, "I think it's time to call the authorities about this situation. Identity theft, corporate espionage, attempted extortion. These are serious federal crimes, Sarah. You're looking at significant prison time." As James began dialing, Sarah realized that her hope of fighting back had been an illusion. Marcus hadn't been her salvation. He had been her destruction. James had used their alliance to gather evidence that would not only destroy her, but also eliminate Marcus as a threat once and for all. The perfect trap within a perfect trap, and Sarah had walked into it with her eyes wide open. The next 24 hours unfolded like a nightmare choreographed by James himself. Within an hour of catching Sarah with his documents, federal agents were at their door with a warrant for her arrest on charges of corporate espionage, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit extortion. Sarah watched in horror as they handcuffed her in her own living room, while James played the role of the shocked and betrayed husband to perfection. "I can't believe she would do something like this," he told the lead agent, his voice heavy with manufactured sorrow. "She's been acting strangely for months, but I never imagined she was capable of criminal behavior. I'm worried that her pregnancy has affected her judgment more severely than we realized." The agents were respectful but firm. Sarah's protests fell on deaf ears as they walked her past the neighbors who had come out to watch, their faces a mixture of shock and judgment. The woman who had seemed to have everything was being arrested like a common criminal. At the federal building, Sarah was processed through the system with efficient professionalism. Fingerprints, photographs, paperwork. The booking officer was kind but distant, treating her like any other white-collar criminal who had made poor choices. "You're entitled to a phone call," the officer informed her as they led her to a holding cell. Sarah realized with crushing despair that she didn't know who to call. Her parents couldn't help from 800 miles away. She had no close friends in New York. The only lawyer she knew was Thomas Brennan, James's attorney, who had helped craft the prenuptial agreement that was now working exactly as intended. In the end, she called Marcus, hoping against hope that he might have escaped James's trap. The number was disconnected. Sarah sat in the holding cell, surrounded by women who had made genuinely bad choices, and tried to understand how completely she had been outmaneuvered. James hadn't just set a trap. He had created an entire false reality designed to destroy both her and Marcus simultaneously. Hours passed before a court-appointed attorney arrived. Jennifer Walsh was young, overworked, and clearly overwhelmed by the complexity of Sarah's case. "Mrs. Hartwell, I have to be honest with you," Jennifer said, reviewing the charges. "This doesn't look good. The prosecution has evidence of you photographing classified corporate documents, communication records with a known corporate espionage suspect, and financial records showing suspicious transactions from your accounts." "Those transactions were made by my husband to frame me," Sarah protested. "And Marcus Reed isn't a criminal. He's a whistleblower trying to expose my husband's crimes." Jennifer looked skeptical. "Do you have any evidence to support these claims?" Sarah realized that she didn't. All the evidence she and Marcus had gathered was now in James's hands, probably already destroyed or altered to support his version of events. "My husband has been psychologically abusing me for years," Sarah said desperately. "He's been recording me, isolating me, building a case to have me declared mentally unfit. Mrs. Hartwell, I understand you're under tremendous stress, but I need you to focus on the actual charges against you. The prosecution has physical evidence, digital evidence, and witness testimony. What we need to do is negotiate the best possible plea agreement." A plea agreement. Sarah realized that Jennifer already believed she was guilty, that everyone involved in the legal system had already accepted James's version of reality as truth. The arraignment was a brief, humiliating affair. Sarah stood before a federal judge while the prosecutor outlined her alleged crimes with clinical precision. Corporate espionage, conspiracy, identity theft. The evidence was overwhelming, the prosecutor claimed. The defendant was clearly a flight risk given her husband's substantial assets. Bail was set at $500,000. Sarah's heart sank as she realized that even if she could access their joint accounts, James had probably already moved the money beyond her reach. She would sit in jail until trial, pregnant and alone, while he continued to destroy what was left of her life. "Your Honor," Jennifer said, standing to address the court, "my client is 26 weeks pregnant and poses no threat to the community. She has no prior criminal record and strong ties to the community through her marriage." The judge looked skeptical. "Miss Walsh, your client is accused of stealing classified information from one of the country's most important data security companies. The crimes she's charged with have national security implications. I'm not inclined to release her on her own recognizance. We understand Your Honor's concerns, but Mrs. Hartwell's husband is willing to post bail and take responsibility for ensuring her appearance at trial." Sarah turned to stare at Jennifer in shock. James was willing to post her bail? Why would he want her released when keeping her in jail would serve his interest better? The answer came to her with chilling clarity as the judge accepted James's offer and set conditions for her release. House arrest with electronic monitoring, no contact with potential co-conspirators, no access to computers or phones except under direct supervision, mandatory psychological evaluation. James wasn't posting her bail out of love or concern. He was posting it because having her under house arrest in his custody gave him complete control over her environment. He could continue his psychological manipulation without the inconvenience of prison visits, and he could document her behavior under stress to support his claims of mental instability. When Sarah walked out of the courthouse that evening, wearing an ankle monitor and facing federal charges, she found James waiting with his lawyer and a team of what appeared to be private security personnel. "Thank God you're all right," he said, embracing her in front of the assembled media, who had somehow learned about her arrest. "We're going to get through this together. We're going to get you the help you need." But the cameras captured his performance perfectly. The devoted husband standing by his troubled wife, the picture of loyalty and forgiveness in the face of unthinkable betrayal. As they drove home in James's car, surrounded by his security team, Sarah realized that her situation had actually gotten worse. Before, she had been trapped in a marriage with a criminal who was systematically destroying her. Now she was trapped in a marriage with a criminal who was systematically destroying her while she faced 20 years in federal prison for crimes he had committed. "I hope you understand now," James said quietly as they pulled into their driveway. "This is what happens when you try to fight me. This is what happens when you forget who has the power in this relationship." Sarah looked at the house that had never felt like home, at the ankle monitor that would track her every movement, at the man who had destroyed her life with surgical precision. "Marcus?" she asked. "In federal custody, facing his own charges. It seems he had quite a collection of stolen corporate data in his possession. Amazing how these things turn up during warranted searches. You planted it." James turned to look at her with those cold blue eyes that had once seemed so attractive. "I protected my interests using all available resources. Marcus chose to make himself my enemy. You chose to betray your husband. Actions have consequences, Sarah." As they walked into the house together, Sarah carrying her unborn child and wearing federal monitoring equipment, she realized that James had won completely. He had eliminated Marcus as a threat, neutralized her as an opponent, and positioned himself as the long-suffering victim of his wife's mental breakdown and criminal behavior. The perfect crime, executed with perfect precision, and Sarah was trapped at the center of it with no way out and no one left to help her. The man she had married was not just a criminal. He was a criminal genius, and she had underestimated him at every turn. Now she would pay the price for that underestimation for the rest of her life. House arrest in her own home became a new level of psychological torture that James had clearly planned in advance. Every room was equipped with cameras. Every conversation was recorded. Every movement was tracked and analyzed. Sarah existed in a fishbowl where her jailer was also her supposed protector, documenting her distress as evidence of her mental deterioration. The mandatory psychological evaluation came 2 weeks after her release on bail. Dr. Patricia Holloway arrived at the house with an assistant carrying recording equipment and a stack of psychological assessment forms that seemed designed to prove instability rather than evaluate it. Mrs. Hartwell, I'm here to conduct a comprehensive psychological evaluation, as ordered by the court, Dr. Holloway explained, settling into the living room as if she owned the space. She was an older woman with sharp features and cold eyes, carrying herself with the authority of someone accustomed to determining other people's fates. Sarah immediately felt uncomfortable with her, but she had no choice but to cooperate. The evaluation was a condition of her bail, and any resistance would be noted as evidence of her unwillingness to seek help. I understand you've been under considerable stress lately, Dr. Holloway began, consulting her notes. Your husband has provided me with some background information about your recent behavior. Paranoid accusations, erratic financial decisions, aggressive confrontations. These are concerning patterns. Dr. Holloway, my husband has been systematically abusing me for years, Sarah said carefully. The behaviors he's documented were responses to psychological manipulation, not signs of mental illness. Dr. Holloway made a note on her pad, her expression skeptical. Mrs. Hartwell, making accusations against your support system is often a sign of paranoid thinking. Your husband has been nothing but devoted to your welfare. He posted your bail, arranged for your care at home, and has been advocating for treatment rather than punishment. Sarah realized that Dr. Holloway had already made up her mind before walking through the door. This wasn't an evaluation. It was a predetermined conclusion looking for supporting evidence. The questions that followed were clearly designed to elicit responses that could be interpreted as unstable. Do you ever feel like people are watching you? Yes, because James has cameras in every room. Do you believe your husband is trying to harm you? Yes, because he's systematically destroying my life. Have you engaged in behaviors that you later couldn't remember or couldn't explain? Yes, because I was gathering evidence while pretending to be having a breakdown. Every truthful answer Sarah gave was twisted into evidence of paranoid delusions, memory problems, or dissociative episodes. Every attempt to explain the context was noted as elaborate justification systems or resistance to acknowledging problematic behaviors. The evaluation lasted 4 hours and covered every aspect of Sarah's life, from her childhood to her marriage to her current legal troubles. Dr. Holloway seemed particularly interested in Sarah's relationship with Marcus Reed and her claims about James's criminal activities. Mrs. Hartwell, you've constructed a very elaborate narrative about your husband being involved in corporate espionage and psychological warfare, Dr. Holloway observed. But the evidence shows that you were the one engaged in corporate espionage, and your husband was the one trying to get you help. Don't you think it's possible that you've confused victim and perpetrator in your mind? No, Sarah said firmly. I know what happened to me. But your certainty about events that contradict all available evidence is itself a concerning symptom. Reality testing is impaired when we become so invested in our version of events that we can't accept contradictory information. Sarah felt like she was drowning in quicksand. Every word she spoke was being used to bury her deeper. Dr. Holloway had clearly been briefed by James and was working from his script, not conducting an objective evaluation. When the evaluation finally ended, Dr. Holloway packed up her materials with the satisfied air of someone who had confirmed what she already believed. Mrs. Hartwell, I'll be submitting my report to the court within a week. I strongly recommend that you consider the possibility that you need more help than you're currently receiving. Your husband has been remarkably patient, but even the most devoted spouse has limits. After Dr. Holloway left, Sarah sat in the living room and tried to process what had just happened. She had been evaluated by a professional who had concluded that she was delusional, paranoid, and unable to distinguish reality from fantasy. The report would become part of her criminal case file and would influence everything from her sentencing to any future custody proceedings. James appeared in the doorway, having monitored the entire evaluation from his office. How did it go? He asked with false concern. You know how it went, Sarah said wearily. You scripted the whole thing. I provided Dr. Holloway with factual information about your recent behavior. What she concluded from that information was entirely her professional judgment. She's not objective, James. She came here with a predetermined conclusion. She's one of the most respected forensic psychologists in the state, Sarah. If she concluded that you're struggling with mental health issues, perhaps you should consider that she might be right. The conversation was being recorded, Sarah knew. Her protests would be noted as further evidence of her inability to accept help or acknowledge her problems. That night, as Sarah lay in their bed listening to James breathe beside her, she tried to think of any possible way out of the trap he had constructed. Federal charges, house arrest, psychological evaluations declaring her mentally unfit, a husband who controlled every aspect of her environment and documentation. In 3 months, she would give birth to a child who would immediately become a weapon in James's arsenal, another tool for ensuring her compliance. The next morning brought the worst news yet. Jennifer Walsh, her court-appointed attorney, called with updates about the prosecution's case. "Sarah, I have to tell you that they've added new charges," Jennifer said, her voice tight with stress. "Money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of justice." "How is that possible? I haven't done anything new." They found additional evidence during their investigation. Apparently, Marcus Reed had been funneling money through accounts linked to your Social Security number. The prosecution is arguing that you were a full partner in his criminal enterprise, not just a victim he manipulated. Sarah felt the walls closing in even tighter. "Jennifer, you have to understand that James has been setting me up for years. These accounts, this evidence, all of it is fabricated. Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. The prosecution has offered a plea deal. If you plead guilty to the corporate espionage charges and provide testimony about Marcus Reed's criminal activities, they'll drop the money laundering and conspiracy charges. You'd be looking at 18 months to 3 years instead of 20 years. I can't testify against Marcus. He was trying to help me. Sarah, Marcus Reed is facing life in prison on racketeering charges. He's been linked to corporate espionage activities going back 10 years. The man who approached you wasn't a whistleblower. He was a career criminal who used you to get access to your husband's company." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Marcus hadn't been her salvation after all. He had been exactly what James claimed, a criminal who had manipulated her for his own purposes. But he knew things about James, specific things about how he operates, information he could have gotten from any number of sources during his years of criminal activity. "Sarah, you need to face the reality of your situation. You were used by a criminal, you made choices that broke federal laws, and now you need to minimize the damage to yourself and your baby." Sarah hung up the phone and stared at the ankle monitor that tracked her every step. She had been wrong about Marcus. She had been wrong about her ability to fight back. She had been wrong about everything. James found her sitting on the floor of the nursery she had been painting when this nightmare began. The yellow walls looked garish now, a mockery of the hope she had felt just weeks earlier. "I heard you talking to your lawyer," he said, sitting down beside her with what might have been genuine sympathy. "This must be very difficult for you." "You knew," Sarah said quietly. "You knew Marcus was a criminal from the beginning. I suspected he might approach you eventually. Men like Marcus are predictable. They look for vulnerabilities to exploit, and an unhappy wife with access to corporate information is an obvious target. So you let him manipulate me." "I let you make your own choices, Sarah. I hoped you would choose your family over a stranger with questionable motives." Sarah laughed bitterly. "My family? You mean the family you've been systematically destroying for years?" James was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer than she had heard it in months. "I know you think I'm the villain in this story, Sarah, but everything I've done has been to protect what we built together. You're carrying my child. You're my wife. I don't want to lose you to poor decisions and criminal associates." For just a moment, Sarah almost believed him. The James sitting beside her sounded like the man she had fallen in love with, concerned and protective rather than cold and calculating. But she had learned not to trust her own perceptions when it came to her husband. "The plea deal," she said. "You want me to take it. I want you to do what's best for you and our baby. If that means admitting to mistakes and accepting consequences, then yes, I think you should take it." As Sarah sat in the nursery that would soon hold her child, surrounded by evidence of the life she had tried to build, and the man who had spent years tearing it down, she realized that the final betrayal hadn't come from James at all. It had come from her own desperate hope that someone, somewhere was actually trying to help her. Now that hope was gone, and she was truly alone. Sarah signed the plea agreement on a gray Tuesday morning in November, her signature shaky as she admitted to crimes she had committed while trying to escape from the man who had orchestrated her downfall. 18 months to 3 years in federal prison, to be served after the birth of her child. The baby was due in 6 weeks. The media coverage was brutal but predictable. Tech heiress pleads guilty to corporate espionage. Pregnant wife betrays billionaire husband. Mental illness, no excuse for federal crimes. James had clearly been feeding the narrative to sympathetic journalists, painting himself as the devoted husband standing by his troubled wife. At home, Sarah's world had shrunk to the dimensions of her house arrest. She spent her days in the nursery, mechanically preparing for a child she might only know for a few weeks before being separated by prison walls. James hired a team of nurses and specialists to monitor her pregnancy, but Sarah suspected their real purpose was to document her behavior during what he would present as her final mental breakdown. Dr. Holloway returned for follow-up evaluations every 2 weeks, each session reinforcing her original conclusions about Sarah's deteriorating mental state. The combination of legal stress, pregnancy hormones, and unresolved psychological trauma was creating what she termed a perfect storm of psychological decompensation. Mrs. Hartwell, your inability to accept responsibility for your actions is deeply concerning, Dr. Holloway observed during one session. You continue to blame your husband for circumstances that clearly result from your own poor choices. Sarah had stopped trying to defend herself. Every word was recorded, analyzed, and added to a growing file that would influence not just her sentencing, but any future custody arrangements. The lowest point came 3 weeks before her due date, when James sat her down for what he called a difficult conversation about their future. Sarah, I want you to know that I still love you, he began, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine emotion. Despite everything that's happened, despite the choices you've made, I still want to save our marriage. Sarah looked at him with exhausted eyes. What are you talking about? I've been working with Dr. Holloway and a team of specialists to develop a treatment plan for when you're released from prison. Intensive therapy, medication management, structured supervision. With the right support, we can overcome this. James, I'm not mentally ill. I'm trapped. The fact that you still believe that is exactly why you need help. Sarah, you're going to be the mother of my child. I don't want our son or daughter growing up thinking their mother is a criminal who abandoned them for a life of corporate espionage. Our child. The possessive way he said it made Sarah's skin crawl. She realized that James was already planning how to use the baby as another tool of manipulation. What if I don't want your help? She asked. James's expression hardened slightly. Then you'll serve your full sentence, lose custody permanently, and our child will grow up knowing that their mother chose criminal activity over her family. The threat was clear. Accept his version of reality and his treatment plan, or lose access to her child forever. That night, Sarah lay in bed listening to James sleep and tried to imagine any possible future that didn't involve complete surrender to his control. In prison, she would be physically separated from him, but he would still control the narrative about their marriage, her crimes, and her fitness as a mother. When she was released, she would return to house arrest under his supervision, dependent on his financial support and subject to his psychological manipulation. The baby kicked restlessly in her womb, as if sensing her distress. Sarah placed both hands on her belly and tried to send thoughts of love and protection to the child who would soon be born into this nightmare. I'm sorry, she whispered in the darkness. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you from him. The next morning, Sarah woke up to find James gone and a stranger in her kitchen. The woman was young, probably early 30s, with dark hair and kind eyes. She wore scrubs and carried a medical bag, but something about her presence felt different from the parade of professionals James had hired to monitor Sarah. Mrs. Hartwell? The woman said softly. My name is Elena Vasquez. I'm a nurse with the obstetric unit at Columbia Presbyterian. I'm here to check on you and the baby. Sarah's regular obstetrician was Dr. Rodriguez, and she had been seeing her at the hospital for all appointments since her arrest. I wasn't expecting anyone today, Sarah said cautiously. Elena glanced around the kitchen, noting the cameras that James had installed in every corner. Your husband arranged for home monitoring during your final weeks of pregnancy. Standard procedure for high-risk cases. High risk. Sarah wondered if James had told Elena about her criminal charges, her supposed mental illness, her status as a federal defendant awaiting prison. As Elena conducted her examination, checking the baby's heartbeat and Sarah's vital signs, She made casual conversation that seemed designed to put Sarah at ease. "How are you feeling emotionally?" Elena asked while taking Sarah's blood pressure. Preparing for a baby can be stressful under the best circumstances. "I'm managing," Sarah said carefully, aware that their conversation was being recorded. Elena nodded and made notes on her chart. But as she packed up her equipment, she did something that surprised Sarah. She dropped her pen under the kitchen table and crawled under to retrieve it, positioning herself where the cameras couldn't see her face. When she emerged, she handed Sarah a business card for a pregnancy support group, speaking loudly enough for the microphones to pick up. "This might be helpful for connecting with other expectant mothers." But as Sarah took the card, Elena pressed something small and hard into her palm, a tiny piece of paper folded multiple times. "I'll be back next week to check on you," Elena said normally. "Call if you have any concerns before then." After Elena left, Sarah waited until James's security cameras showed him leaving for his office before unfolding the paper. The message was written in tiny, careful handwriting. "I know who you are. I know what he's doing to you. My sister went through the same thing with a powerful man. She didn't survive it. I've been watching your case, documenting what I can. If you want help, wear something blue tomorrow when I come for your appointment. If not, I'll never mention this again." Sarah stared at the note until her hands stopped shaking, then tore it into tiny pieces and flushed it down the toilet. For the first time in months, she felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. Someone believed her. Someone was watching. Someone was willing to help. That evening, when James returned home, Sarah was wearing a blue maternity dress she hadn't worn in months. She served him dinner and made small talk about her day, playing the role of the subdued wife, accepting her fate. But inside, for the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah Mitchell was planning to fight back. She just prayed that this time, her hope wouldn't be used to destroy her. Elena returned the next week with professional equipment and a calm demeanor that gave no hint of the dangerous game she was playing. She conducted her examination thoroughly, checking the baby's position and monitoring Sarah's blood pressure while making normal conversation about the final weeks of pregnancy. "Everything looks good," Elena said, packing up her supplies. "The baby could come any time now." As she prepared to leave, Elena dropped her stethoscope and bent to retrieve it from beside Sarah's chair. In that brief moment when she was hidden from the cameras, she whispered urgently, "Tomorrow at 2 p.m., your husband has a board meeting downtown. I'll come back to check something I forgot. Be ready to talk." The next day, Sarah waited with nervous anticipation. At exactly 2 p.m., Elena's car pulled into the driveway. This time, she carried a small device that she immediately plugged into the wall near the kitchen entrance. "Signal jammer," she explained quietly. "It'll interfere with the audio and video feeds for about 20 minutes before his security team notices the disruption." Sarah stared at Elena with new respect. "Who are you?" "I told you, I'm a nurse. But I'm also someone who has seen what men like your husband do to women, and I'm tired of watching it happen." Elena moved efficiently around the kitchen, checking each camera and placing small devices that looked like medical equipment, but were clearly something else entirely. "My sister was named Maria Vasquez," Elena continued, her voice tight with controlled emotion. 3 years ago, she was married to a real estate developer named Richard Cromwell. Rich, powerful, well-connected. He used the same playbook your husband is using. Isolation, psychological manipulation, financial control. When Maria tried to leave him, he had her committed to a psychiatric facility. Sarah felt sick. "What happened to her?" "She died there. Official cause was suicide, but I know better. Richard had made sure she had no resources, no allies, no credibility. When she finally broke completely, he made sure she couldn't recover." Elena's hands were steady as she worked, but Sarah could see tears in her eyes. "I've been tracking similar cases for 2 years, Elena continued. Your husband isn't unique. There's a network of wealthy men who share techniques for destroying their wives. They attend seminars, share strategies, even have a private forum where they discuss their successes. You have proof of this?" "I have documentation going back 18 months. Photos, recordings, financial records. I've been building a case, but I needed someone on the inside with access to their communications." Elena pulled out a small recording device and set it on the counter between them. "I've been documenting your husband's hospital visits during your previous admissions," she said. "He's been remarkably open about his strategies when he thinks he's talking to sympathetic medical staff." She pressed play, and James's voice filled the kitchen, clear and unmistakably his. The key is consistency. Document everything. Never lose your temper. Always appear to be the reasonable party seeking help for your unstable spouse. The courts are naturally sympathetic to men who seem devoted to mentally ill wives. Sarah's hands began to shake as she heard her husband discussing her destruction with clinical detachment. Another recording, this one from after her arrest. Prison will be perfect for completing her psychological breakdown. 18 months of separation from her child, constant stress, no support system. By the time she's released, she'll be genuinely unstable and completely dependent on my version of reality. He's been planning this for years, Sarah whispered. Elena nodded grimly. The recordings get worse. He discusses tactics for ensuring permanent custody, methods for discrediting your testimony, even conversations about how prison will break down your resistance. She played another clip, James's voice discussing Sarah's case with someone who sounded like a lawyer. The beauty of the federal charges is that they establish a pattern of criminal behavior and poor judgment. Combined with the psychiatric evaluations showing delusional thinking, we'll have everything we need to argue she's an unfit mother who chose criminal activity over her family's welfare. Sarah felt nauseated listening to her husband discuss her destruction as if she were a corporate problem to be solved. There's more, Elena said, producing a tablet. I've been documenting his visits to other women in similar situations. Hospital records, psychiatric facilities, even prison visits. He's been consulting on at least 6 other cases, teaching other men how to systematically destroy their wives. The scope of it was staggering. James wasn't just a predator, he was a teacher of predators, spreading his techniques throughout a network of wealthy, powerful men who saw their wives as assets to be managed and discarded. Elena, this is enough to destroy him, Sarah said, hope flaring in her chest. The FBI would have to investigate. Elena's expression was grim. Not necessarily. James has connections throughout law enforcement and the judicial system. Half the judges in this district have received campaign contributions from his associates. The FBI agents who arrested you have worked with his company on cybersecurity matters. Sarah's hope began to crumble again. Then what's the point of gathering evidence if no one will act on it? Because there's one person they can't ignore, Elena said, meeting Sarah's eyes. You. Your testimony, combined with this documentation, creates a story too big to suppress. But it has to be presented right, at the right time, by the right person. Elena pulled out a business card and handed it to Sarah. Rachel Martinez, investigative journalist with the Washington Post. She's been tracking stories about systematic abuse of women by wealthy men. She's untouchable. One reputation, unimpeachable sources, connections throughout the media industry. You want me to go to the press? I want you to survive this. James is planning to take your child the moment you give birth. He's already filed preliminary custody papers claiming you're mentally unfit and a flight risk. Once you go to prison, he'll have 18 months to establish himself as the primary caregiver and poison your child against you. Sarah placed both hands on her belly, feeling her daughter kick restlessly. It's a girl, she said quietly. The ultrasound last week confirmed it. Elena's expression softened. What did you want to name her? Hope, Sarah said, then laughed bitterly. Ironic, isn't it? No, Elena said firmly. Perfect, because hope is exactly what we're fighting for. Elena's equipment beeped softly. The signal jammer is about to fail. His security team will notice the disruption soon. She packed up quickly while speaking rapidly. Rachel Martinez will contact you within 24 hours. She'll identify herself by mentioning her story about pharmaceutical companies targeting pregnant women. Trust her. She's been preparing this expose for months, but she needed an inside source. As Elena prepared to leave, she turned back to Sarah with fierce intensity. Your husband thinks he's untouchable because he's rich and connected and smart. But he made one critical mistake. What's that? He underestimated how far other women will go to protect someone in danger. There are dozens of us now. Nurses, lawyers, journalists, social workers, even some FBI agents who are tired of watching men like James operate with impunity. Elena's car was pulling out of the driveway when the security system came back online. Sarah had exactly enough time to hide the business card and compose herself before James called to check on her. "How did your appointment go?" he asked, his tone casual but probing. "Fine, everything looks normal. Elena says the baby could come anytime now." "Good. I've arranged for a private suite at Columbia Presbyterian for the delivery. Complete privacy, top-tier security, family-only access." Family-only access. Sarah understood the real message. He was already limiting who could see her during her most vulnerable moments. That evening, Sarah sat in the nursery she had painted yellow months ago, surrounded by tiny clothes and stuffed animals that might soon be all she had left of her daughter. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't completely alone. Elena's courage had given her something she hadn't dared hope for: allies. As night fell and James settled into his office for another evening of managing his criminal empire, Sarah made a decision. She wasn't going to submit to his psychological warfare anymore. She wasn't going to accept his version of reality or his plans for her future. She was going to fight back with everything she had left. For Hope, for Elena's sister Maria, for all the women who had been destroyed by men like James Hartwell. The war he had started years ago was about to reach its final battle, and this time, Sarah wouldn't be fighting alone. Rachel Martinez called at precisely 8 a.m. the next morning, while James was in his home office conducting what Sarah now knew were strategy sessions for destroying other women's lives. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Rachel Martinez from the Washington Post. I'm calling about my story on pharmaceutical companies targeting pregnant women. I believe Elena Vasquez mentioned we might speak." Sarah's heart hammered as she recognized the code phrase Elena had told her to expect. "Yes," she said quietly, moving to the far corner of the kitchen where the microphones might not pick up her words. "I've been waiting for your call. I'll be direct because I know you're being monitored. I've been investigating your husband and his network for 8 months. Elena has provided me with documentation that corroborates everything I've uncovered independently. What I need from you is an on-the-record interview. I'm under house arrest, federal charges. If I talk to you, it could affect my case. Mrs. Hartwell, your case is already decided. James has ensured that outcome. But what we can do together is make sure he doesn't destroy anyone else the way he's destroyed you." Rachel's voice was calm but urgent. "I have testimony from 6 other women, documentation of the network's activities, financial records showing how they coordinate their campaigns. What I don't have is someone willing to go on record about the systematic nature of the psychological abuse." Sarah closed her eyes, thinking about her daughter growing inside her, about the life she wanted to give her versus the reality James had planned. "What do you need me to do?" "Meet me today. There's a small window between noon and 2 when James will be at his board meeting and his security team will be at minimum staffing. Elena will create another signal disruption." "Where?" "The coffee shop on Madison Avenue, 3 blocks from your house. Elena will drive you. 30 minutes, filmed interview, back home before anyone notices." Sarah knew it was incredibly dangerous. If James discovered she had spoken to a journalist, especially one investigating his criminal network, he would find ways to make her pay that she couldn't even imagine. But as she thought about hope growing inside her, about the daughter who would grow up believing her mother was a criminal who had abandoned her family, Sarah knew she had to take the risk. "I'll be there," she said. At 11:50, Elena arrived with her medical equipment and signal jamming devices. "Routine pregnancy check," she announced to the cameras as she began her setup. By 12:15, they were driving toward Madison Avenue in Elena's car, Sarah wearing a hat and sunglasses that Elena had provided. Rachel Martinez was exactly what Sarah had expected: sharp, professional, with the kind of intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She had a small camera crew with her and immediately got to work setting up for the interview. "We have 20 minutes, Rachel said efficiently. "I need you to tell me everything, but focus on the systematic nature of what James did to you. The deliberate isolation, the financial manipulation, the documentation of your responses to use against you." For 20 minutes, Sarah told her story without interruption. She described the gradual erosion of her independence, the discovery of James's surveillance and psychological manipulation, the way he had used Marcus Reed to entrap her in criminal activities, and the elaborate campaign to have her declared mentally unfit. "The most important thing people need to understand," Sarah said, looking directly into the camera, "is that this isn't about one bad marriage. This is about a network of wealthy, powerful men who have systematized the process of destroying women. They share techniques, they coach each other, they have turned psychological abuse into a corporate strategy. Rachel nodded. What do you want to happen as a result of this interview? I want other women to know that they're not crazy, they're not alone, and they're not helpless. I want the men who are doing this to understand that their victims have allies now. And I want my daughter to know that I fought for her, even when it seemed impossible. As Elena drove Sarah home, the weight of what she had just done began to settle in. She had broken every condition of her house arrest, violated her plea agreement, and probably ensured that James would find new ways to punish her. But for the first time in months, she felt like herself again. Not the victim James had created, not the criminal the courts had labeled her, but Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had once commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals. They arrived back at the house with 5 minutes to spare, before James's security system came back online. Elena quickly packed up her equipment while Sarah changed clothes and tried to compose herself. Whatever happens next, Elena said before leaving, remember that you're not alone anymore. The story will run in tomorrow's paper, and once it's out, there's no putting it back in the bottle. That evening, James returned home in an unusually good mood. He had apparently received positive news about some business matter and was more talkative than usual during dinner. The custody arrangements are almost finalized, he mentioned casually as they ate. I've arranged for a private adoption agency to handle the proceedings once you're incarcerated. It's better for everyone if Hope grows up believing she was adopted rather than knowing her birth mother was a federal criminal. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but she managed to keep her expression neutral. James was planning to erase her from their daughter's life completely, to make her disappear as if she had never existed. You'd tell her I was dead? Sarah asked. I'd tell her that her birth mother loved her enough to ensure she was raised in a stable, loving home, instead of being used as a pawn in criminal activities. Even his cruelty had been packaged as nobility. James genuinely believed he was the hero of this story, protecting his innocent child from her dangerous mother. That night, as James slept beside her, Sarah lay awake thinking about the interview she had given and the story that would soon expose him to the world. She thought about hope, growing strong inside her, and the legacy she wanted to leave for her daughter. At 6 a.m., Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Story is live. Check the Washington Post website. Thank you for your courage. RM. Sarah slipped out of bed quietly and went to the kitchen computer. James's security system tracked her internet usage, but she didn't care anymore. The headline made her breath catch. The Wife Destruction Network, How Wealthy Men Systematize Psychological Abuse. The story was devastating. Rachel had not only featured Sarah's interview prominently, but had also uncovered the entire network of men who had been sharing techniques for destroying their wives. Financial records, email communications, recordings of their strategy sessions. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. James's photo was featured prominently, along with detailed accounts of his systematic campaign against Sarah. But more importantly, the story connected his activities to similar cases across the country, revealing a pattern of coordinated abuse that affected hundreds of women. Sarah was still reading when she heard James's footsteps on the stairs. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for work, and immediately saw what she was looking at. For a moment, they stared at each other in complete silence. Then James walked slowly toward the computer, his face a mask of cold fury. You have no idea what you've just done, he said quietly. Yes, I do, Sarah replied, standing up to face him. I've told the truth. You've destroyed yourself completely, breaking house arrest, violating your plea agreement, making false statements to the press. You'll be in prison within 24 hours and you'll never see your child again. Maybe, but everyone will know what kind of man you really are. James laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. Sarah, do you really think this changes anything? I have the best lawyers in the country. I have connections throughout the government. I have resources you can't imagine. You had secrecy, Sarah said. You had the ability to operate in shadows and control the narrative. Now everyone knows what you are. As if summoned by the conversation, Sarah's phone began ringing. Reporters, lawyers, advocacy groups. The story was already creating ripples throughout the legal and social services communities. James watched the calls coming in with something approaching panic in his eyes. For the first time since Sarah had known him, he looked genuinely afraid. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Sarah agreed, placing both hands protectively over her belly. "It's just beginning." Within hours, Sarah's house was surrounded by news vans and federal agents. Her house arrest was revoked, but instead of being taken to prison, she was transferred to protective custody while investigators sorted through the implications of Rachel's story. Elena appeared at her side as if summoned, no longer pretending to be just a nurse, but revealing herself as part of a coordinated network of women who had been working to expose men like James for years. "You did it," Elena said, tears in her eyes. "The FBI can't ignore this anymore. There are already investigations opening in 12 different jurisdictions." Sarah looked out at the chaos surrounding what had been her prison and felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year. Hope. Not the naive optimism she had once carried, but the hard-earned hope that comes from surviving the worst someone can do to you and choosing to keep fighting anyway. James Hartwell's empire was crumbling, his network was exposed, and his victims finally had voices. And in a few weeks, Sarah would give birth to a daughter who would grow up knowing that her mother had fought for justice, even when it seemed impossible. The perfect crime had been undone by imperfect courage, and that was enough. Sarah rocked her daughter Hope in the nursery of their new apartment, watching the sunrise paint the walls golden. The federal charges against her had been dropped after the FBI's investigation revealed the extent of James's manipulation and criminal network. Her testimony, combined with evidence from dozens of other victims, had led to federal racketeering charges against James and 17 other members of his network. Elena knocked softly on the doorframe. "How are my girls doing this morning?" "Perfect," Sarah said, looking down at Hope's peaceful face. "Absolutely perfect." Elena had become more than an ally. She had become family. After the truth came out, she had helped Sarah relocate to a secure apartment across the country, far from James's remaining associates and the media attention that still surrounded the case. The Washington Post story had indeed changed everything. Congressional hearings were investigating how wealthy men had been able to operate their abuse networks for years without detection. New laws were being written to protect women from systematic financial and psychological manipulation. Support groups and advocacy organizations had received unprecedented funding to help victims rebuild their lives. "Any word on the trial?" Elena asked, settling into the chair beside Sarah. "Rachel called yesterday. James's lawyers are still trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecution isn't interested. They want to make an example of him." Sarah felt no satisfaction in James's downfall, only relief that he would no longer be able to hurt other women. The man she had once loved was gone, if he had ever really existed at all. What remained was a criminal facing the consequences of his choices. "And Hope's custody situation?" Sarah smiled, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Officially resolved yesterday. James signed away all parental rights as part of his plea negotiations. She's mine completely." It was the outcome Sarah had dreamed of, but never dared hope for. Hope would grow up knowing the truth about her parents, but would be raised with love, honesty, and the knowledge that her mother had fought for justice. Rachel Martinez had continued investigating the network, uncovering similar operations in 6 other countries. Her work had sparked an international movement to protect women from systematic abuse by wealthy predators. The story had resonated with women around the world who recognized elements of their own experiences in Sarah's testimony. Support groups had formed in dozens of cities. Legislation was being introduced to close legal loopholes that had allowed men like James to operate with impunity. Most importantly to Sarah, other victims had found the courage to come forward. The network that had once seemed invincible was being dismantled one testimony at a time. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked. "Going through all of that, risking everything?" Sarah looked down at Hope, who was beginning to stir in her arms. Her daughter would grow up in a world where women had more protections, more resources, more allies than ever before. She would never have to experience the isolation and manipulation that had nearly destroyed her mother. "Never," Sarah said. "Not for a single moment." As the morning sun filled their small but warm apartment, Sarah Michelle held her daughter close and thought about the future. They had survived the worst that wealth, power, and cruelty could devise. They had found allies in unexpected places and strength they didn't know they possessed. The perfect trap had been broken by imperfect courage, and from the wreckage, something beautiful had emerged. Justice, healing, and hope. Sarah's story had ended where it began, with a woman holding her child and planning for tomorrow. But this time, the future belonged to them completely, and no one would ever have the power to take it away again. Hope opened her eyes and looked up at her mother with complete trust. And Sarah knew that every moment of fear, every day of despair, every risk she had taken, had been worth it for this single perfect moment. They were free, they were safe, they were home, and that was more than enough. And that's Sarah's story. A reminder that sometimes the most ordinary people are capable of the most extraordinary courage when they're fighting for what matters most. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the power dynamics in your own life, or if you know someone who might need to hear Sarah's message of hope and resistance, then show your support by hitting that like button right now. Your engagement helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. Drop a comment below and tell us what moment in Sarah's journey hit you the hardest. Was it when she first discovered the truth? When she realized the scope of James's manipulation? Or when she finally found the courage to speak up? We read every comment, and your insights help us understand which stories matter most to our community. And here's the most important thing you can do. Share this video. Share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone, someone who's questioning their own reality, or someone who believes that truth and justice still matter in a world that sometimes seems designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. If you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell, because stories like Sarah's are exactly why we do this work. Every week, we bring you true stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges, stories of courage, resilience, and the power of speaking truth to power. Remember, you are stronger than you know. You deserve better than you've been told, and you are never as alone as they want you to believe. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.